Eternal Filena is an RPG for the Super Famicom that was developed by Tokuma Shoten and released in 1995. Despite my kind of alarming knowledge of most RPG titles in existence, couldn't save that space for something useful, huh, brain? This one flew under my radar, and I only recently discovered it. Of course I needed to play it as soon as possible, so I did, and here we are. Researching this one, I discovered it is based on a series of light novels written by Takeshi Shudo, who is the writer on Minky Momo and the original Pokemon anime. Adding on to this pedigree is the fact that Akemi Takada was the illustrator on the series. Older anime fans will recognize her as the artist for Creamy Mami and Kimaguri Orange Road, two fairly legendary series. This, coupled with the fact that the book also received a short OVA in the 90s, the time period I watched a ton of anime, makes it doubly weird that I had never heard of it. The plot revolves around the Empire and the people they have conquered and enslaved that are known as the Klechia, and more specifically around a girl named Filena. She has been raised as a boy her whole life by her grandfather in order for her to become a battler, essentially a gladiator who is forced to battle to the death for the amusement of the Empire's citizens. The reasoning for this is simple. She is actually the secret heir to their lost kingdom, and a life of training will prepare her to fight back against the Empire and reclaim their lost home. While I have no idea how closely the game follows the books, it definitely ends up having a different feel to its contemporaries, as it regularly deals with heavier subject matter, like the aforementioned slavery, character death, gruesome experiments, and even features a prominent lesbian relationship. As I was playing through the game, I started to wonder why this title never made it outside of Japan, and I honestly think it comes down to a mixture of the heavier plot, the fact that it is tied directly to a Japanese-only book series, and it came from a smaller publisher. It's probably for the best it stayed in Japan though, as Nintendo was pretty heavy-handed with censorship at this time, and I can't imagine this game would have come out unscathed. Now, I can't sit here and say the game is completely grim-dark, though. Sure, it does have those heavier themes, but there are also plenty of moments of wackiness and levity. For one thing, Filena's disguise is not exactly rock solid. She seems to have men's clothing, kinda, and short hair, and that's kinda it, I guess? And other characters are constantly figuring out that, whoops, he's a she, complete with anime-style flailing and implied nosebleeds. One more thing about the plot that is worth mentioning is the last part of the game. I obviously can't detail it because spoilers, but the game goes from a fairly straightforward fantasy story straight into Earthbound-esque weirdness out of nowhere, and I can't help but wonder if the game cut up big chunks of the books or something, especially since it reorients itself for the ending. Like, what on earth was the last boss? The actual gameplay of Eternal Filena is pretty standard turn-based RPG fare, but with one different mechanic. Each character is able to equip multiple weapons, which you can switch between at will during battles, and instead of characters gaining skills individually, they learn them based on which weapons they have equipped, and can only use them with that corresponding weapon. So if you want a character to use a heal skill, you would need to switch them to a weapon with that ability, like the medical kit. While this does add a bit of strategy to a fairly basic battle system, it's not something the game really forces you to use a whole lot. It's easy enough to beat the game by just spamming the same skills over and over. The game's progression is also not that structured either. Like many other RPGs of the time, you will generally hit a boss that is much more difficult than anything before it, which requires you to go back and grind a number of levels in order to progress. I can't really say this is more than a nitpick because of how common this sort of thing was, and sometimes still is, but it's something to keep in mind. Battles feature another annoying problem, and that is the lack of information about your HP and items. So it's impossible to know how much HP you've lost from the total unless you've memorized it, or what items actually do. Again, this isn't a problem limited to this game, but it's a quality of life feature that is noticeably lacking. Another quality of life feature that is far worse than anything I've mentioned previously is the ability to sort items, or rather, how god-awful the game is at handling this. A lot of older games didn't give you the ability to sort your items, which definitely sucked, but Filena does something so much worse. It gives you the ability to sort them, but only one by one. Would an auto-sort button have been so hard to implement? Or even just have the game automatically sort the items by type or alphabetically or something? But nope, you have to do it all manually. If you want my advice on this one, just stick all the healing items up top and let everything else be a cluttered disaster. You likely won't even be using much of the other stuff anyway. As far as the graphics and sound go, Eternal Filena doesn't do a whole lot to stand out. While certainly the developers were limited in the fact that they needed to present a grounded fantasy story, they really missed an opportunity to do something really stylish here, either in the graphics or the soundtrack. Eternal Filena was released the same year as Chrono Trigger, which really underscores the shortcomings it has. It's not awful by any means, but it feels like an early Super Famicom RPG, and it really doesn't bring anything new to the table. Honestly, it's a bit of a mystery as to why Tokuma Shoten felt the need to turn the series into a game at all. The plot is probably the best part of the game, so why not just read the books instead, really? Of course, if you can't read Japanese, the only thing available to you is the fan translation of the game. If you are interested in giving this one a spin, I can say that the translation is a competent piece of work, with only a few typos and bits of missing text, so it's well worth the download. Oh, and I should mention that if you want this one for your collection, be prepared to shell out a lot of cash for it because it's fairly rare at this point, especially in complete condition.